I have been recruited by an American company to do remote work. They have suggested I start an American LLC in Wyoming, and they would contract/pay me through this LLC. Does anyone have any information on this?
I think that's a completely reasonable solution. If it's a U.S. company and they want to hire you as a contractor, they also want to avoid the employee classification of you as a worker. And so it's ideal for an American company to hire you as a LLC instead of hire you as a natural person, because that's one of the determining factors with the classification of employee versus independent contractor. So if they can claim that they hire a company to provide this service, then it's much better off for the company to do that by hiring an LLC, let's call it XYZ LLC, that you own. So that's going to be a much better option for your employer. But it can also be much better for you too, because if you are a remote worker and maybe you're nomadic, you're traveling around, it makes it much easier for you personally, because then you have a lot more flexibility on how you pay yourself. And as an LLC, because it's a pass-through, the income passes directly through to you as a natural person, then you don't have to worry about overly complex situations like, let's say you go live in Costa Rica, or you go live in Brazil, or you go spend 2 months out of the year in Portugal. You don't have to worry about registering in those countries as a sole trader or an entrepreneur or getting different visas. Of course, based on how you're traveling. If you're living there longer term, of course, you need to have visas to be there longer term. But it makes it much easier, much nicer, because also then your employer or then your company doesn't have to register you as a employee in that country. They just hire a company and outsource that particular service to the company. So it's really ideal. Also for you, it benefits you tremendously, because you should be able to go back to the employer and negotiate a higher rate of pay as a contractor than as an employee, because they're saving a pretty significant amount of money with payroll tax withholdings, any benefits packages they might had to have paid you, like 401k and healthcare and that sort of thing. So let's say, for example, the salary as an employee might have been $100,000. Well, you should be able to negotiate something above that as a contractor, because as an employee at 100, you actually cost your employer, depending on the state, because the rates are different for unemployment insurance and workers' comp and that sort of thing. And benefits, of course, can vary dramatically. But if your salaried income is $100,000, then you're probably costing your employer at least $120,000, maybe $130,000 or $140,000. So you should be able to negotiate something above $100,000, and where you both get some benefit there. And then also, as the owner of a business now, as the owner of an LLC, you get a much higher level of write-offs in your business. So you can reduce your own taxable income down a lot lower than you could have as an employee, because there's a lot more write-offs available to you as an entrepreneur than there is as an employee. If you are a Canadian working as a contractor for a U.S. company, Roman, we don't have any more information here, do we?
I think they live in Canada.
They live in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then, as a Canadian living in Canada working for a U.S. company, it still could be a decent option for you, but you need to understand, because Canada does not have an LLC type entity. They don't have a pass-through type entity in Canada. Canada will treat that company as a corporation, and you'll have to pay company tax on it you'll basically have to pay company tax on it in Canada, and then you pay your personal income tax or your dividends. But either way, basically, you're still going to have to pay Canadian tax on it as owner of a U.S.-based LLC. But you will, as I mentioned previously, you will get a much higher level of write-offs for the business, because now you own a company instead of being an employee of the company. The only thing is, as a Canadian citizen, Canadian resident owning a U.S. LLC, you're going to have to treat it like a Canadian corporation. In reality, that might not be a big deal, because if your salary or let's say your employment contract or your contract is $100,000 a year, basically you can run all of your expenses through that and then pay the rest out from the company as a salary to you as the employee of the company. And then you wouldn't owe any company tax in Canada anyway. You would only owe personal tax on it in Canada like you would otherwise. So that's what I would do. But there's still some advantages to you there. You can negotiate higher rates. You can get a much higher level of write-off since it's running through a company, though.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the comments were people saying there will be significant issues holding an LLC as a Canadian citizen. And I'm guessing that they're kind of just referring to what you were saying about how
they're referring
they don't recognize
to
it
the company
as
being treated as a corporation in Canada. Good timing on that question, by the way. I had 2 Canadian clients today with that exact issue.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, I had 2 consultation calls today with Canadians. We were discussing that exact issue.
One of the other comments in here, this guy suggested start a Wyoming LLC, create a trust to be the primary shareholder of the LLC. The trust acts as a pass-through, helps reduce your tax burden. You claim taxes paid in the U.S. when filing in Canada. It'll cost about $3,500 to set up.
That's an overly complex structure that's really unnecessary because you're not going to have a tax owed in the U.S. anyway, because the U.S. LLC is a pass-through on the U.S. side. And under U.S. source income tax rules, if you're providing a business service, your taxation is based on where you physically perform that service. So if you're physically in Toronto doing your job, then you're not in the U.S., so you don't have U.S. source income. So actually the income just passes through to you as a Canadian, taxable to you as a Canadian. The only complication there is, like we previously discussed, is that the U.S. LLC will be treated as a Canadian corporation. But what I would do is just zero out the profit of the LLC and pay it all to myself as a salary. You pay your normal ordinary income tax rate in Canada, which you would do anyway. The structure you just mentioned, having a trust as the shareholder of the U.S. LLC and treating as a pass-through, I mean, there's no difference. That basically does the exact same thing. It makes it a pass-through to you as a Canadian person, and then you're going to pay tax on it at your ordinary income tax rates as a Canadian person anyway. So it actually doesn't make any sense to do that. It just makes it much more complicated and cost you a lot more money to set up.